Facebook is receiving criticism again today for how it handled evidence of Russian election interference on the social network. A scathing New York Times report based on interviews with more than 50 people examines the roles Facebook's top two executives played. It says CEO Mark Zuckerberg and COO Sheryl Sandberg, quote, ignored warning signs and then sought to conceal them from public view.
The Times reports security experts at Facebook flagged attempts by Russian hackers to probe accounts as early as the spring of 2016. That's months before Zuckerberg downplayed the effect of Russian propaganda on the 2016 election. It also said Sandberg oversaw an aggressive campaign to combat Facebook's critics. In a response to the article, Facebook tells CBS News that we are working hard to ensure that we protect our community from bad actors. Cecilia Kang is a technology reporter for the New York Times, and she joins us now from Washington to talk about this story. So in the story, Cecilia, you reference critics who say that Facebook ignored repeated warning signs about the dangers posed by its products and what dangers. So what specifically were these critics talking about? What were the dangers that they were referring to?
I mean, the broadest definition would be malicious content on the site, either hate speech or actually foreign meddling. And there were signs of this early. It started really with the account of now President Trump when he said as a candidate that there should be a complete ban on Muslim immigrants. And that's when Facebook had to grapple with the idea that there was a significant public figure who was potentially inciting hate. And that was a violation of its terms. What Facebook's top executives, Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg, did was they deflected. They passed on that decision to folks in Washington, their policy staff, their lieutenants. And instead of taking a broader view as to whether this should be a time to act on this particular account and address hate, they didn't. The biggest other category was foreign meddling. There were signs much earlier than when Facebook admitted publicly that there was foreign meddling on the site. And in our reporting, we saw that there were efforts to either minimize or actually conceal the extent of the role of Russian interference on the site around the 2016 election. And this was orchestrated and commanded by the top executives, particularly Sheryl Sandberg. And these revelations inevitably became public later on.
Cecilia, you and your colleagues spent several months working on this story, 6 months, if I recall, working on this story. And what I was struck by in reading it, despite pronouncements by Mark Zuckerberg to the contrary, is the way that Sheryl Sandberg, the COO, reacted when numerous times people within the company raised concerns about what was happening at Facebook. In fact, it's in the very first paragraph of your story where she's seething at Alex Stamos, who apparently is the security chief. So he's presumably the guy who's supposed to let the bosses know, hey, there's something going on here that we need to take seriously. Instead, she seemed to regard it as almost a personal attack in front of the board. Explain a little bit of that MO, that modus operandi that allowed them to operate this way.
What we tried to accomplish, and we did start about 6 months ago, we tried to accomplish answering this simple question. What was going on within Facebook, inside Facebook, amid all these cascading crises? And what was the role of Sheryl Sandberg and Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO, in the decision-making processes? And what we found was a culture of really making these problems with content on the site, either foreign meddling with disinformation or hate speech, inciting hate, as well as hate speech in foreign countries, that the top leadership did not make it a priority. They were distracted by personal projects as well as growing the company, new technologies, growing revenue. And what Sheryl Sandberg in that first anecdote, I think, illustrated was that the company was not fully grappling. The top leadership was not fully grappling, was not fully aware or accepting the full extent of the problems that the site faced. And for her to react that way to Alex Stamos showed that there was not a culture where the top leadership was making it clear to everyone else within the company that this had to be priority number one. In fact, she was upset that the chief of security revealed the extent of the problems and said that the problems may not be over, that there may be more foreign meddling. And that was what was truthful. And the board was responding to that, and she was upset that he had disclosed so much.
Yeah, it seemed like Facebook thought they had maybe an image problem or a problem that was perhaps political, but not necessarily about security. You know, you're right about how Facebook hired some well-connected Republicans to help avoid decisions, and you know, they were concerned about riling up conservatives. Why was that a primary concern for them?
You know, Facebook was in a uncomfortable position in that its top leadership was associated with the Democratic Party, very closely associated. And in fact, Sheryl Sandbergs had been long rumored to be a candidate for the Treasury Secretary if indeed Hillary Clinton was elected. She was not, and that threw that off the rails. And we have from several people that she had talked about political aspirations within Facebook. So there was no mistaking the idea that Facebook as a company, its employees leaned liberal, and that its top leadership was closely allied with Democratic politicians like Hillary Clinton and as well as people in the Obama administration. And that had been, since the House and Congress flipped to a Republican majority around 2010, had slowly become a problem for Facebook. Recans started speaking out about concerns that the company was biased, so much so that Republican lawmakers have recently started accusing the company and other tech companies of actually manipulating its algorithms to suppress conservative views on these platforms. That's how far things have gone in terms of the animosity that many Republicans feel toward these Silicon Valley companies that are, again, closely aligned with liberals. And so the reaction from Sheryl Sandbergs and other executives at Facebook is to try to work both sides, to try to be as balanced as possible, to try to level that perception that is a very Democratic-leaning company. And so a lot of that effort was steered from Washington. There is a Republican who leads the global policy staff, Joel Kaplan, who's a former George W. Bush administration official, and he's very well connected with Republicans here, and he has consistently pounded the message that the company needs to not rile up Republicans, in fact, make Republicans more friends. And folks in Menlo Park, the headquarters of Facebook, they defer to him because of his expertise and his connections. And they are very, very afraid that Republicans will be upset, specifically because they fear that Republicans will turn on them and potentially seek regulations over the internet companies, including Facebook.
So Sheryl Sandbergs was bought into Facebook essentially because Mark Zuckerberg said, look, we need you to manage the company and also run interference with us when it comes to politicians. And she's basically done that. But in reading this report, it makes you wonder if now she's not a liability for the company and what the board is going to do. Look, she's made Facebook even bigger and richer than it ever was since she's come on board. So clearly, the fact that she's also hired to make the money, that's happening. But with this PR crisis on their hands, do you think, based on your reporting, that she is going to stick around, or do you think that it becomes too problematic to keep her?
It's hard to say. I think that there is a lot of credit due to Sheryl Sandbergs for Facebook's growth. Clearly, she turned Facebook into a global communications platform, the biggest in the world. She helped with Mark Zuckerberg, 2.2 billion people on the site, and she turned Facebook into an internet advertising juggernaut. So she deserves a lot of credit, and in fact, also her side projects, her personal projects, specifically her book Lean In, as well as her most recent book Option B, has been in some ways good for the company in that it's raised the profile of its executives in a positive light. I think the attitudes have shifted in the past 2 years, obviously. There's a lot more scrutiny over her, and she is, in many ways, responsible for everything that isn't related specifically to engineering and product, which is what Mark Zuckerberg's in charge of. And that's a lot. Sheryl Sandberg's in charge of a lot then. That includes policy, advertising, communications, and Facebook as a 2.2 billion user company has grown so big that there are questions as to perhaps whether she should be able to, she can oversee that as well as all of her other responsibilities. And in many ways, advertising and technology were the guiding lights for Facebook for many years. They were the two priorities to keep the company growing and to keep the company in the global spotlight. So now policy and communications has become more important, though many would say it's been too late.
Cecilia, we only got about 30 seconds, but I just want to ask you about this. The fear right now is that Facebook could be broken up because as the numbers you just touted, enormous. It's a big company. Breaking that up to multiple companies would be devastating for the company. But Facebook also responded with a point-by-point rebuttal to the article. What's the New York Times' response to what Facebook is saying?
So I haven't seen the point-by-point rebuttal. We have talked to them throughout our whole process. We've been above board about what we found and how, and we have talked to 50 people. The vast majority of them are current and former employees. So we have we stand by our reporting. We stand by really the whole, the main themes of the story, which really can be summed up as how Facebook made mistakes, how it frankly screwed up, how it covered up, and then how it lawyered up in Washington. And that was what we were trying to achieve. And we think it's an important story because Facebook is the world's biggest communications platform. It's unregulated in the United States. It also is an enormous force in Washington as a lobbying force. Internet companies are unregulated, and yet they are the biggest spenders on lobbying in Washington, D.C. today.
Great reporting to you and your colleagues. Thank you so much for joining us here at CBS News, CBSN, to talk about it. We appreciate it.
Thank you.